Fewer clubs have been closer to completely disappearing than Crystal Palace. A bit of background: the club had been struggling financially for several years. Owner Simon Jordan was poorly running the club and using his own funds to boost the club's revenue. This would only ever lead to disaster because when Simon Jordan would essentially run out of money in 2009, the club suffered severe cash flow issues, meaning a large percentage of the staff and even some players were not getting paid, as well as massive debts mounting in the club. But the biggest problems would come in early 2010. The club was placed into administration with chance of evaporation, which caused a domino effect of non-stop problems for the club for the rest of the season. A 10-point deduction in the championship meant they were now in a relegation fight, as well as the club being forced to sell some of their key players and their manager Neil Warnock leaving, meaning the club was in total panic, with chance of relegation to the third division of English football. To think that the well-structured Premier League club that is Crystal Palace today were once on the very edge of being forced to close shows how potentially damaging this situation was. And although they managed to scrape survival, the administration crisis of 2010 was famous for causing Crystal Palace a world of problems.
Everton at one point had one of the most promising strikers of his generation, and they were aware of the gem that 16-year-old Wayne Rooney was for their club. But Everton at the time were really struggling both financially and on the pitch to keep up with the other Premier League teams. So in a real last-ditch effort to keep their heads above water, Everton agreed to sell Wayne Rooney to Man United for an initial fee of 27 million. And when Everton agreed to sell him, they needed some serious replacement. This unfortunately did not happen, and this is where the mistake kicks in, as in years later, their attack really just consisted of mediocrity, especially in the attack. But what makes this mistake of selling Wayne Rooney that much worse is because Everton made the exact same mistake 10 years later. Everton had a very bright spark in Romelu Lukaku, also one of the best strikers of his generation. But just like Rooney, they sold him for cash profit and replaced him with overpaid signings, mediocrity, and moving on. Point is, a great player was sold and the money was poorly invested twice. Newly promoted teams into the Premier League often do not have lots of revenue to invest in trying to stay up, but Fulham somewhat went against the mould in the summer of 2018. Under the watch of then manager Slavia Jokanovic, Fulham would essentially burn through £100 million of what they thought at the time was good spending. Jean-Michel Sarri for £30 million, Frank Augustina for £25 million, Alexander Mitrovic for £25 million, Alfie Mawson for £17 million, and a smothering of others. For a promoted side to spend this kind of money put a lot of pressure on Fulham to perform well in the Premier League that season, but their season didn't exactly go to plan. 7 wins, 5 draws, and 26 losses. An embarrassing season for the club, and it showed that Fulham invested £100 million very poorly, and because of that, they were relegated from the Premier League just a season after they were promoted.
Ipswich have never really cemented themselves as a permanent Premier League team.
However, there was one individual who definitely got them the closest. In the year 1999-2000, manager George Burley captained the ship of Ipswich Football Club to a promotion just before the 2001 season. For a newly promoted side, expectations are usually low, with Ipswich's main goal being just to stay up. But manager George Burley and the players at the club had other ideas. Defying almost all odds, they finished 5th that year. But the next season, things looked a lot worse.
Ipswich's 01-02 season had a pretty dreadful start, winning just 8 out of their first 12 games. And at this point, long-time manager of Ipswich, George Burley, was sacked controversially after the poor run of games. This still remains one of the most controversial sackings in Premier League history, a manager that dragged the club to the top of the Championship and then to the top of the Premier League. And after only one bad spell, he was sacked with no lenience from the board of the club. The following season showed that this might have been a bad decision, as they were relegated after the 02 season and only made it back up to the Premier League recently last season. Now, when anyone thinks of Leicester City's time in the Premier League, the 15-16 season is the first thing in people's heads. Obviously, it was a monumental achievement for the club and a season that fans still talk about today. But I think the club's biggest mistake was actually that title winning season, and more specifically, how they responded. First reason is because in the 15-16 season, they were playing so well that other and bigger teams could not help but notice how well Leicester's players were playing. This meant when the summer of 2016 came around, Kramaric left for Hoffenheim, Schlupp left for Crystal Palace. These players weren't crucial to Leicester, but it meant their squad depth was slightly damaged. But more importantly, N'Golo Kante was sold to Chelsea for £32 million, meaning Leicester's main defensive midfielder and one of the players of the 2015-16 season was gone from Leicester. Now, Leicester did attempt to sign defensive midfielders to make up for the loss of N'Golo Kante, but in short, playing better equals more players leaving for bigger clubs, and this continued for multiple years after their Premier League title win. Now, a weaker squad depth was always going to cause the club problems, but also if you finish in the top four in the Premier League, you secure a spot in the Champions League, and this arguably caused Leicester more problems than it helped them. Now, everyone knew that Leicester had a relatively small squad compared to the Big Six, and this was only made more obvious when Leicester players were playing multiple times per week. The team's best players were becoming visibly more fatigued, and you can see this happening right now to Aston Villa in the Premier League, who are juggling the Champions League and the Premier League. And just like Leicester in the 16-17 season, they struggled to maintain form in both competitions, as this is because the effort needed from the squad to juggle another major competition is only ever going to lead to fatigue and injuries. And the final reason is more of a mental one. Imagine you have just had the season of your career and have just become the champions of England. As a player at Leicester, you are literally on top of the world. But the next season, reality hits. Leicester City were no longer the underdogs, and their odds to win the Premier League had gone from 5,000 to 1 in the 15-16 season when they won it, to 25 to 1 in the 16-17 season. Almost nobody expected anything from a lower mid-range Premier League side. But in the 16-17 season, all spotlights had gone over the club, as they were the centre of attention. This obviously meant tons more pressure on the players and the manager, which may have perfected their mental performance as they were going into games expected to do better. Anyway, that pretty much wraps up this video. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.